As the 90s started rolling on, Hulk Hogan was starting to stall. Hulkamania was not the juggernaut that it once was in the 1980s and maybe even in 1990. Hulk Hogan's reputation had taken one hit after another, often self-inflicted because the man was always lying through his ass, lying through his teeth, lying through his shrinking pythons. But that being said, Hulkamania still was etched in Americana and in the eyes of some WWF fans to the point that WrestleMania 9, hooray, WrestleMania 9 occurred that set the company back for a full goddamn year, and then Hogan didn't put Bret Hart over, went to make movies, even though he'd already been making movies during the latter part of his WWF run, made Blunder in Paradise, and then got set up financially for life by Ted Turner, because Eric Bischoff convinced Ted Turner to open up the goddamn checkbook and the fortunes of WCW would change. It's what I want you to believe, though. And then Kevin Nash and Scott Hall showed up. Actually, strike that, reverse it. Scott Hall, Kevin Nash showed up, and then, well, the NWO would be born because Hogan realized he could ride that gravy train all the way to even more success and bigger deals from Turner. And then he made a return in Toronto at the Skydome, WrestleMania 18, that should have been his last match. It was his apex, and then it all started crumbling down because he just didn't know when to stop, and he just didn't know how to modify his behavior. I'm John Rentham with my review of Real American Hulk Hogan, Episode 3, Hollywood Hogan, a Netflix original. And yeah, if you are watching these in succession, you will probably wonder why maybe episode 4 takes a little bit to come out. That is because, as of right now, I'm about to go to work, but I decided to record this review because I have some things to say. And I'm not going to get into the minutia of every single goddamn thing on this, but there were some parts that they omitted and some parts that were flat out lies, but some fun. So anyway, more home videos. Bruce the Barber Beefcake is there. Hogan talking to Vince before WrestleMania 8, his retirement. Ventura said it was a 10-year retirement tour. It was actually more like a 15-year retirement tour. Walking on a thin line by Huey Lewis in a news place as we get into the beginning of episode 3 and everything. And then Bischoff, Nash, and Ventura talk about, well, there's always one more match. Even Nick Hogan said he thinks he could have one more match. It's like, oh, here we go again. 1990. Yeah, things were really starting to have, some strain and strife on his life. Because the thing is being the centerpiece, the tent pole of a promotion, yeah, it could actually start to wear on people. Hogan's vitamins, and it was funny that Ventura said orals or injectables. Now, that was funny. That was a bar, I'm not going to lie. And then roid usage, it was all legal. He said he was between 300 and 348 pounds. I don't think he ever got to 348. Yeah, he was a large individual at some points. There's no way he got to 348, even if he was 6'5", 6'7", whatever. And then the roid crackdown. And Dr. George Zahorian. And his appearance on Arsenio Hall. David Shoemaker of The Ringer. This guy that... he's basically just a knowledgeable fan, but I think he thinks he's more knowledgeable than he actually is, because he's always come across as kind of an idiot to me. It's one thing for me to just sit here and talk on YouTube. I just am a guy with a regular, retail job, just doing my stuff, and I've just been a passionate wrestling fan, but I've never gotten into wrestling media. And there are those that have gotten into wrestling media that actually are very, very good and knowledgeable and trust their sources and invest in the minutia and everything of this and actually try to, do some good. And David Shoemaker just comes across to me as a liar. And then Bret basically says, it's a lie that gets in the end, like Nixon. Bret is great in these. I love Bret Hart in these. My God, I had to pause this several times because I was dying laughing. I encourage everybody, if you watch this episode, please pay attention to the Bret stuff. Yes, Bret Hart is my favorite wrestler of all time. I have no problem saying that. But at least it's just so amusing to just hear Bret and just see, the vitriol that he has, but the open honesty. And he's right, by the way. Hogan was dismissive of the fact that Bret was the guy. Hogan came back noticeably slimmer. Granted, a lot of people slimmed down. It wasn't just Hogan, but he was most noticeable. And honestly, that probably extended his career and his life quite a bit, because being off the gas and being on maybe supplements that were legal would actually help his joints and stuff like that, because you got to think about this. Hogan was born in 53, so he was 40 or near 40 by the time he came back for WrestleMania 9. And man, WrestleMania 9 was just terrible. Hogan trying to take the spotlight once again. Hogan blew Bret off when Bret was trying to say hi to him, and Bret had even done like a really nice caricature cartoon deal for Hogan and others for, at WrestleMania 8 or in the lead up to WrestleMania 8, because Bret was a really good artist, and I assume still is. But, Hogan says, I had the stroke to get things done back then, or squash things, and he still had that. At least he admits that he used his creative control, but still, he can never keep the lies straight. And how Vince made the decision. It's just one of those things, and Bret just says, fuck you, because Bret is just awesome at these interview pieces. And he mentioned how it sucked. Now, here's the thing. Hogan still meant a lot to wrestling fans, especially a lot of those in Vegas. And yes, Hogan, obviously, as a draw, as somebody that made a lot of money, meant more to wrestling as far as mainstream than Bret did. And I'm not knocking that as far as a character. Bret was a better wrestler and drew well in, the UK and in Europe and stuff like that. The business had changed. But at this point, people were tired of Hogan. Some of the kids were tired. Like, he didn't make that many appearances on Raw, due in large part to the fact that the New York crowd was, they cheered him mildly. They were telling Beefcake basically, like, good. That one guy that basically told Beefcake, it was good that he got that parasailing accent. Whoever that guy is, my goddamn hero. It's just funny. It just is. And, Bret saying he was a good guy once upon a time, but in the end, he was a backstabbing, knife-wielding piece of shit. I had to write that down. That was tremendous. Bret wasn't in a lot of this after this. I mean, I don't know if he's going to be in episode 4 or not as of this recording. And yeah, Hogan won the title. They didn't have any footage of him referring to it as a trinket when he faced off against a Great Muta in New Japan. Probably couldn't get the rights to that footage. And then Broken Wings by Mr. Mister plays. Oh, this is Vince's mistake. Hogan's going to prove that he still has more left. Hogan had gotten stale in the WWF. He just had. That's the whole thing. There were pockets of fans that still liked him. But the bloom was off the rose. The bloom was off the rose with wrestling in general in the U.S. ECW was still like Eastern Championship Wrestling. I think it was just getting started in like 92, 93, if I remember right, part of the Tri-State Wrestling Alliance. WCW had some fans, but things were lagging, and Vince McMahon had torpedoed a lot of his goodwill because of the upcoming steroid trial and all that stuff. And Hogan, lying on Arsenio Hall, a whole bunch of this shit. Hogan was upset by the betrayal, called Vince a whole bunch of names. They failed to mention that Hogan basically went out of his contract, and he got out of his contract. He was done after wrestling Yokozuna on a bunch of house shows after losing the title back to him at King of the Ring 93 in August of 93. They didn't even have Hogan put over Bret at SummerSlam like Hogan said he would. They showed a brief clip of No Holds Barred, which actually was a failed pay-per-view venture thing that they had to match the movie. That didn't work. Suburban Commando, they actually got Christopher Lloyd for this. That's amazing. Good for them. Mr. Nanny, he wasn't a good actor, but at least he seemed to be having fun with it. I can't fault that. Granted, Natalia did say that Hogan was the first wrestler to break the mainstream. Yes, with Rocky 3. But let's look at the fact that Roddy Piper was in They Live, which was arguably a much better movie. Maybe not better than Rocky 3, but better than anything that Hogan did. Granted, Piper didn't really do anything good after that. Hell comes to Frogtown. But whatever. The right guard ad spots, anything less would be uncivilized. I do remember those right guard ads very, very well. I mean, those were, played a lot when I was a kid. The Gremlins 2 spot where he played Hulk Hogan. He wasn't good at acting, but he seemed to be having fun. Kermit playing Larry King and doing that interview stuff, that was kind of funny. You could all pop for anything with the Muppets. Thunder in Paradise, which is terrible. Thunder in Paradise is just a horrible, horrible thing. They skipped over so much stuff. They skipped over the fact that, like, he faced Sid. He screwed over Sid he faced Sid at Mania 8 after screwing him at the 92 Rumble. The stuff with Flair was briefly mentioned, but they glossed over the fact that Flair was a lot more over in a lot of markets. He got cheered at Madison Square Garden when they thought that he beat Hogan. It wasn't a ton of cheers, but it was noticeable. And Flair got the meeting with Hogan to see Bischoff in awful English. And Hogan said, I appreciate the offer to be the next John Wayne. He wasn't going to be the next John Wayne, though he hated the same people John Wayne did. Look it up, folks. Look up John Wayne and the Oscars. The Oscars controversy. You'll know what I'm talking about. Regis Philbin, bless him, was always nice to the wrestlers and loved wrestling and made appearances at Manias, and bless Regis Philbin. WCW was wrestling and everything, but then they juxtaposed so much footage. They went from like 94, Bunkhouse Buck and Dustin Rhodes, and then they went back to 91 with Big Josh, and then they showed Stan Hansen at one point, who was in like late 90. And then they had RoboCop, which was Capital Combat 1990. Yes, they actually had a thing for RoboCop 2, by the way, folks. And no coherency with this stuff. And granted, I probably shouldn't be picking on this, because production-wise, it was very well put together as far as how it was shot, and I like the deep cuts of footage, but God, they needed to just flow that better. By the way, Big Josh, Matt Bourne, piece of shit also. Chamber of Horrors, where Abdullah the Butcher got shocked, and some of the ring mat got set on fire. Dusty Rhodes' ideas didn't always work, folks. So, WCW had to turn it around every now and then, and Hogan got the best deal. It was like a few TVs, a couple pay-per-views, and I think, it would amount to a fuck ton of money while he could still have a very light schedule. And this, by the way, was, when he signed that contract, was over a year before they got WCW Nitro. So, he actually had to give back some of that contract so certain people wouldn't get fired. Oh, really, Hulk? Then how did your friends come in? How did Beefcake come in? How did Duggan? How did so many of these people come in? He didn't give... I mean, I'm not saying that he might have not gotten some of that, like, on a back-end part of the deal, but I don't really necessarily believe that Hogan was that generous. So, at first it worked. It did. Bash at the Beach 1994 versus Ric Flair was a big-time deal, 250,000 pay-per-view buys. I forget the exact number, somewhere around that, which was the biggest pay-per-view buy rate that WCW had had up to that point. Or at least tied for it. It was around that. And there was still a lot of animosity with Vince. Hogan did basically testify that Vince did not give him steroids and all that stuff and everything, because as much as we knock Vince and will continue to knock the dirty pervert that he is, I don't believe that he did anything with the steroids. As far as, he may have encouraged people to take steroids, but do I believe he gave them steroids? No, I don't. Do I believe Dr. George Zahorian was somebody that worked with the company and made sure that they got their steroids through illegal means, hence why he's in jail? Sure. But I don't believe that Vince was a dealer. I believe that Vince did every bad thing under the goddamn sun, like what he did to Rhea Chatterton and all that stuff, which was a story that should have not been dismissed initially, and quite frankly should have brought Vince to ruin before any of this success happened. But then wrestling would be a lot different, but Rhea Chatterton would have gotten her justice. Fortunately, she got her justice later, but way, way, way too late. Cody felt that Hogan was older. I mean, yes, because he was 41 at this point. He was slimmed down, but he'd been slimmed down since, like, coming back in 93. And the boos started. They were coming in hot. And they were coming in hot by the time he was feuding with Vader, by the way, which was right after Starrcade 1994. So it is not like it was a golden period. Bischoff did mention 3 or 4 months after, Hogan made his appearance, that they started getting their boos and everything. The fake parade was kind of funny. And Hogan was upset by some of the boos. He was like, oh, you want to boo me? Yeah, Hogan, we were tired of you. I was tired of him. I mean, I was like 14, 15 when I really started getting tired of Hogan. Even though I love Bret at WrestleMania 9, and I didn't like Hogan winning the title, in hindsight, I understand why Vince maybe panicked, but it was a bad idea. Hall and Nash show up. Nash didn't grow up a fan, but then realized he's a better athlete than Hogan, and if Hogan can do it, I can do it. The NWO storyline, this is pretty much where they started turning it into the NW Blow. Do not get me wrong, the NWO very influential, and I love those televisions, and there were so many great memories, but goddamn it, some of that coverage of the NWO gets a little bit overblown. So, Great American Bash 1996, Bischoff takes the powerbomb through the tables. I'm surprised did not break his neck with how he landed, even though Nash did good, setting him down. He threw him, but he threw him safely as you can throw somebody. But goddamn, that looked brutal. And then, Hogan was like, I got to turn heel. Hogan didn't want to turn heel because he didn't want to lose the merchandising money and all the stuff with the kids and everything, but fans were starting to turn on him. Things were drying up. Kevin Sullivan had even said, hey, you got other people on the other channel like The Undertaker being cheered, so maybe it's time to turn. Also, the tide's turning. One thing about Kevin Sullivan, besides being somebody with a shady background, to say the least, he did understand wrestling. He also understood how to book his own divorce. And where were the dogs in the enclosed pool area? They ever get locked out or unlocked? So, Bash at the Beach 96, I've talked about this before. Hogan cuts a promo of his life. By the way, that stupid fat fuck fan deserved every bit. I hope he got head trauma, and I hope he was unable to work. You rush into the ring, you fat hillbilly, you deserve to get stomped. So hopefully, he's not alive. And if he is, then hopefully he's in goddamn traction for doing that. Because look at that guy. I mean, look at the state of him. So anyway, and by the way, if it seems like I'm skipping over some of this stuff, because this is where not only are they blowing themselves, but it's been a lot of stuff that has been talked about before in the NWO documentary and other things and stuff like that. So the black and white vignettes, he had to get some fashion tips from Linda. Booker weighed in. Starrcade 96 against Piper, which actually was a big deal. Piper beating him, not for the title. We can't have that happen. Then they cut to the Ultimate Warrior rematch at Halloween Havoc 98. My God, what a terrible match that was. I did love the footage they included the old lady taking the swing at Hogan. That was rather hilarious. And who made who, was playing over this montage. That was kind of cool. And the footage was all over the place, though. We went from like 94 to 96, red and yellow Hogan, to like 96 to 99, black and white Hogan. They couldn't make up their minds. He wins the world title at Halloween Havoc 1996. He's celebrating in 1997 for his birthday, which, Beefcake had actually shown up with a birthday cake to celebrate Hogan's birthday. And then they did the whole thing where he turned on Beefcake, and then Beefcake came back as a disciple and stuff like that. But they're doing that celebration. He's kind of living a hard life. I did like the home movie stuff. And yes, Hogan deserves credit for reinventing himself and leaning into the fact that the fans didn't like him. But boy, oh boy. So then he started having knee injuries that piled up. He had a knee injury at Spring Stampede 1999 in the Tacoma Dome. I was not there for it, unfortunately, which is fine, whatever. Can't grieve forever. So then he said he blew his knee out against the Iron Sheik on January 23rd, 1984. No, he fucking didn't. I'm not saying he didn't have knee issues and back issues for doing a leg drop and doing that kind of stuff and running hard with those concrete rings. There is no way he blew his fucking knee out and worked for 15 goddamn years. Even taking that year plus off, doing Thunder in Paradise and doing the movies and stuff like that. No fucking way. Even slimming down, no fucking way. So, finger poke at Doom. They really skipped over a lot of stuff. They skipped over him putting over Bill Goldberg on TV. The whole president of the United States thing that he had the idea for didn't work. Finger poke at Doom. Nash was like, there were 60,000 people in the Georgia Dome. There was like 43,000 for Bill Goldberg. Like 6 months before. No, Yeah, about 6 months before. And there was maybe 30,000. It was still a big crowd, don't get me wrong. 60,000? Fucking come on, Nash. Put down the wine. So anyway, yeah, the finger poking was terrible. They were going to set up a machine to take on, or to, feed to Bill Goldberg. But yeah, then he got hurt. This is something that Nash basically said on Legends of Wrestling years ago. Except Bill Goldberg got hurt. Like, had to take a little bit of time off because of the ladder match, the tasing ladder match. Or the cattle prod ladder match, or whatever the fuck it was. Taser on a pole. Where he beat Scott Hall, sold out 99, and then would get revenge on others. He would have intermittent appearances, but then he, nearly lost his goddamn arm doing the limo window deal. Whole point is, Nash's timeline of events wasn't all that great. Russo was brought in as WCW's in Freefall, and they were in Freefall especially after Spring Stampede 99. I think Slamboree 99 was in that big St. Louis dome, and they still had a respectable crowd, but then half the dome wasn't being used, if not more. Thanks to Brian Knobbs and Bam Bam Bigelow for showing that. But Russo had ideas of pushing younger talent, nothing wrong with that. New talent is the lifeblood of the industry. But he was terrible at it because he had no creative ideas. Bash at the Beach 2000. As God is my witness, you will never see that piece of shit again. Or as God my witness, I'll go into the goddamn grave, you will never see that piece of shit again. And yeah, then Hogan left WCW, sued WCW, has been told about on the dark side of the ring. Vince bought WCW for like $2.5 million plus like $1.7 million for like a few other things. Hogan's Time Warner deal basically expired at the beginning of like January 2002. They glossed over the XWF, where they tried to do tapings at Universal Studios. Look up the XWF, by the way, guys. That actually was a promotion. A very small promotion, and Hogan immediately went back to the WWF, and then they ran shows, I think, until March. So, we closed basically with The Rock at WrestleMania 18, and, the leg drop he beat Andre the Giant with that move, the goosebumps. Like, it was a goosebump-inducing moment. Big goddamn deal. Really cool that he got that, because Hogan, people were surprised Hogan got cheered in Toronto, a city that has history in wrestling going back to the fucking carnival days, before television, when Toots Mondt caused the death of a young lady. Look it up, folks. Hogan was going to get booed there. Hogan was going to get booed in the same city where he had one of the biggest shows in Skydome history when he faced the Ultimate Warrior and put him over. Yeah, Hogan was going to get booed in Toronto after being gone for 8.5 years. Now, he was in WCW, and some fans tuned into that, but he went away. How can I miss you if you won't go away? He came back, and they tried everything to heal him up in the lead up to that. The leg drop, he beat Andre the Giant with that move, one of JR's best calls. And he put over The Rock. Then they said Vince needed him to be back in the red and yellow, and skip all the way to January 2003. They skip over when he won the title from Triple H, when he put over Brock, chewing the blood capsule and everything. It's insane how they did that. And there we go. Then the person becoming the character and all that shit. So yeah, that is basically it for Hollywood Hogan. There's a lot to talk about. There was a lot of stuff that they just kind of glossed over. I talked about a few things. But what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. And I'm John Ritlin. Until we see how they try to gloss over the bad shit that Hulk Hogan did throughout his life and trying to repair his image, happy trails to you.